Captain and I will hopefully field any questions afterwards. So we have Paul on screen. Hello Paul, can you hear us?
I hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. Well, welcome to WhaleFest. How's winning?
Very great an audience there. I can't see anybody. I see a couple of dolphins in the foreground, but okay. To begin with, just earlier this month, a scientific paper was released giving a conservative estimate of the number of whales that have been killed in the 20th century. Over the 200 years previous, 1700 to 1900, the whaling industry, predominantly the American whaling industry, killed 300,000 sperm whales. Yet from the year 1900 until now, we've killed almost 3 million whales, 2 million of them in the Southern Ocean. We've reduced some of these whale populations down to less than 98%, many of them certainly, most of them, less than 80% of them, or more than 80% of them were removed. We have waged this incredibly merciless, relentless, cruel war against the whales for centuries, and it's got to end. One of the things that I've dedicated my life to is to abolish and eradicate whaling by all people, everywhere, for any reason. We need to throw it on the rubbish heap of history and learn to live in harmony with not just the whales, but all of the species that are part of that incredible biodiversity in our oceans. I say all the time that we have to look at the protection of our oceans because it is the life support system for the planet. If the oceans die, we die. It's as simple as that. We don't live on this planet with a dead ocean. And if you look on the Earth as a spaceship, which is what it is, we're traveling through space at an incredible speed, every spaceship has a life support system. And our life support system is primarily in the ocean. But what it is it's run by a crew. And we're not crew members. We're simply passengers having a great time entertaining ourselves at the expense of almost every other species on the planet. The crew are those species that make it possible for us to even be here. And they're more important than we are, because without them, we don't exist. They can do quite well without us, but we need them, they don't need us. The worms, the bees, the flowers, the trees, the fish, we need them, they don't need us. And the problem is that we're eradicating life in our oceans at an alarming rate. Through the 20th century, we took out over 90% of the biomass of fish in the oceans. And most of that was done since 1950. The year that I was born, 1950, there were 3 billion people on the planet. Now there's 7.5 billion people on the planet. It's impossible for that number of people to continue to eat the oceans alive, which is what we're doing. I was raised in a fishing village on the east coast of Canada, and I have seen the steady diminishment of life in our ocean ever since. In the 60s, I remember that the one thing that we didn't eat were mussels because we considered them dirty. Now that's what you order when you go to my hometown if you're in a restaurant. One of the reasons that Sea Shepherd has advocated for veganism and why our ships are all vegan is because we're simply eating the oceans. 40% of all of the fish taken out of the ocean isn't eaten by people. It's fed to pigs and chickens and salmon and fur-bearing animals and domestic house cats. We're living in a world right now where pigs are eating more fish than the world's sharks. Chickens are eating more fish than the world's albatrosses and puffins put together. And house cats are eating more fish than the world's seals. The oceans cannot continue to sustain this kind of exploitation. And for the most part, it's out of sight, out of mind. Nobody really gives a damn, because that really is the hallmark of the human species. We don't give a damn. And that certainly can be quite evident when you simply look around at what our priorities are. And those priorities certainly are not conservation of resources. They're certainly not the protection of life. They're certainly not living in harmony with the natural world. There are 3 basic laws of ecology, and humans are breaking them every day in every way. The first is the law of diversity. that the strength of an ecosystem is dependent upon diversity within it. The second is the law of interdependence. Those species are interdependent with each other. And the third is the law of finite resources, that there's a limit to growth, a limit to carrying capacity. And what we're doing is stealing the carrying capacity of other species, removing them so that our numbers can grow. Well, we're going to reach a point where we remove too many of those species, and it's all going to come crashing down, and it's not going to be very pleasant. We have to learn to live in harmony with the rest of the species on the planet, and we have to live in harmony with the oceans. This life support system doesn't just provide food, it also regulates the temperatures, climate. Of course, when you live in a world where the head of the environmental department in the United States in charge of climate change believes there's no such thing as climate change, then it's quite obvious that a political remedy is going to be very, very difficult to come by. In 1972, I attended the United Nations Conference on the Environment in Stockholm, Sweden. I attended it 20 years later in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. During that time, nothing happened. And since Rio, nothing has happened. Politicians get together, they spend a lot of money to wine and dine each other, and pat each other on the back, and sign all these wonderful promises, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and yet not a single one of them has ever been realized. They talk, and they talk, and they do nothing. And it's for that reason that I set up the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. We're not a protest organization. We're an interventionist organization. I got fed up with protests in the 70s. It was a very submissive sort of situation. You know, it's always like, please, please, please don't kill the whales. And of course, they kill them anyway. No, we went in and said, no, you're not going to kill the whales, and if you continue to do it, we'll sink your damn ships. And that's what we began to do. We intervene against illegal activities. And what started as an organization is now a global movement. And one of the reasons I think that we attract so many volunteers is the fact that in return we give people the understanding that they're actually achieving something, that they're getting real results. Since we first went down to the Southern Ocean back in the early part of this century, every year we got stronger and stronger. 6,000 whales are now alive in the Southern Ocean, swimming freely, and they're there because we intervened. And I can't think of anything that gives a greater feeling of satisfaction, of achievement. It's the fact that there's 6,000 whales, and more because they've also went on to produce more, are there. And they're there because impassioned people had the courage to go down there and stand in the way of the Japanese harpooners. We knew when we took on Japan that we were taking on a very formidable opposition, one of the most powerful countries in the world economically. And so we expected repercussions. So none of this is surprising. But you know, we beat them. We got this to the forefront. We put a TV show on the air. We brought it into the living rooms of millions of people around the world. We got the attention of the people whose attention we needed to get. It got into the World Court in The Hague, and they ruled that Japan's whaling was illegal. And for this reason, this is the first time, this year is the first season in 50 years that the Japanese whaling fleet has not been down to the Southern Ocean to slaughter whales. Now they intend to go again next year. But due to their program, they still don't have the support of the International Whaling Commission. But they said that they're going to take 333 whales, but over a larger area. But another problem has arisen that we have to address, is that while Japan is continuing to go after whales there, and even though they're doing it illegally, there's another illegal whaling operation going on in the world, which is even worse, and now we have to turn our attentions to that. And that is the 1,786 whales to be killed in the North Atlantic by Norway, Denmark, and Iceland. And we're not counting the Faroe Islands. These are whales independent of those figures. We have to go up there and confront them. We've confronted Iceland and Norway in the past, but for 10 years we've been taking on the Japanese in the Southern Ocean. And we're a relatively small organization, so our resources didn't allow us to have a whale wars on two fronts in both the northern and the southern hemisphere. But we're getting stronger, and we're getting more ships. Right now we have the Sam Simon and the Bob Barker chasing Nigerian flag, Spanish-owned toothfish poaching vessel in the South Atlantic. They found them off the coast of Antarctica, chased them into the Indian Ocean, and now today is the 87th day of that pursuit, and the thunder is still running. Meanwhile, we seized 72 kilometers of their illegally set gill nets and turned that over to Interpol in Mauritius just 2 weeks ago. That chase continues, and the Sam Simon and the Bob Barker are heading north, which is convenient because we'll need them up here to go after the Norwegians, the Icelanders, and the Danes. What we did in the Southern Ocean this year was to go after poachers. Nobody's been touching them ever since 2003 when the last big pursuit happened by the Australians. This year we motivated New Zealand to get involved. They found another poaching vessel, 3 of them in fact, took their pictures and then went home. It's proved to have been very embarrassing to the New Zealand Navy because they said that they didn't have the authority to stop poaching vessels in New Zealand waters off of Antarctica. And when a member of Parliament for the Labour Party in New Zealand said, well then how come Sea Shepherd did it and you couldn't? The general for the armed forces said, he said, with all due respect, sir, we're not pirates like Sea Shepherd. Well, the fact is this. Why do we fly that flag? Because pirates get things done. The biggest pirates in the world today are the governments, and they don't get things done. They're too busy looting the planet of its resources. But pirates get things done. Back in the 17th century, the British Navy was unable to stop piracy in the Caribbean. There was good reason for that. It's because there was a lot of bribes going into the pockets of British politicians and Royal Navy personnel. It took Henry Morgan to shut down piracy off of Panama, and he was a pirate. If you want to stop pirates, you need pirates to do it. British once called John Paul Jones, founder of the United States Navy, a pirate. Jean Lafitte was a pirate. The British actually gave knighthoods to Sir Walter Raleigh, Sir Francis Drake, who were pirates. You know, they say that the pirates were thieves and they stole gold. Yes, they did. They stole gold from the Spaniards who had stolen it from the Aztecs. So was it really a crime to steal back something which has been stolen by somebody else? Well, what Sea Shepherd really is sort of a vigilante approach, but we have to do what we do because governments simply lack the economic and the political motivation to go out and uphold their own laws, regulations, and treaties. We have all the laws, regulations, and treaties we need to defend our oceans. We just simply have nobody enforcing them. And therefore, that is why the oceans are being overly exploited the way they are. So Sea Shepherd's involved on many levels right now, protecting dolphins in Japan. Every year our Code Guardians go there, and we're on the ground from September 1st to the 1st of March to make sure that no dolphin dies out of sight and out of mind. It's very difficult to do direct intervention on the ground in Japanese territory, but we are costing them a lot of money in policing costs, and we are getting the word out every year since 2003. And we will continue to do that. We call that Operation Infinite Patience. We also have campaigns in the Galapagos where we've been since 1500, for the last 15 years, and the reason being is that we always said if we can't save something as profoundly beautiful and as wonderful as the Galapagos Islands, what can we say? So for the last 15 years, we've been in partnership with the Ecuadorian Federal Police, with the rangers of the Galapagos National Park. We've provided patrol boats. We've set up an AIS surveillance system at the cost of €1 million. We've provided radios. We've provided canine detection units to sniff out shark fins and other wildlife products that are being smuggled. And we've made a difference, and we've brought down the number of sharks and other creatures that are being poached in the Galapagos Islands. We've tried on many occasions to work with other governments. In 2002, we intercepted an Ecuadorian longliner off of Cocos Island in a Costa Rican island. We seized it, caught it with over 400 sharks that were illegally caught within 2 miles of the beach of a national park. And we turned it over to the rangers, and it was the first vessel to be prosecuted and seized by the Costa Rican government of that for poaching. Riding on that success, we offered our services to the Costa Rican government in 2002. And we went down to meet with them. But on the way, I found a Costa Rican longliner catching sharks and finning them in Guatemalan waters. So I asked the Guatemalan government what we should do, and they asked us if we could stop them, which we did. We didn't injure anybody. We didn't damage any property. But when that Costa Rican boat got to Costa Rica, they said we attempted to kill them. So I was charged with 8 counts of attempted murder. But I wasn't too concerned because we had a documentary crew on there making that film called Shark Water. And we went into the courts in Costa Rica and we showed our footage and presented our evidence and the witnesses. And they dropped the charges against me. But a week later, they appointed another judge and another prosecutor and charged me again, but this time with 8 counts of assault. Once again, we went into the court. Once again, we presented our evidence. And once again, they dropped the charges and gave me permission to leave Costa Rica. Never gave it any thought until 10 years later when I arrived in Germany and I was arrested on a warrant from Costa Rica. This time, they had changed the charge to reckless operation of a vessel. And Japan had also charged me with conspiracy to trespass. Now, I don't know if anybody knows anything about the Interpol Red List, but this is a list that's used for war criminals and serial killers. Nobody in the history of the Interpol Red List has ever been put on there for conspiracy to trespass or for reckless operation of a vessel, when nobody was hurt and no damage was done. That indicates just exactly how much power Japan has. The reason Costa Rica is involved is because the Costa Rican warrant was issued 1 week after the president of Costa Rica met with the prime minister of Japan in Tokyo. So Costa Rica is really just doing the bidding for the Japanese. We've made the Japanese very angry, and understandably so. We've cost them over $200 million in losses from their illegal whaling operations, and we certainly don't have any regrets for that. But again, to show the kind of power, in 2011, they laid a lawsuit against us in the United States, saying that they wanted an injunction to stop our interventions against their illegal whaling in the Southern Ocean. The Japanese had already been condemned by the Australian federal court for found in contempt for continuing to whale despite the court ruling. Judge Richard Jones in Seattle said, "No, I'm not going to give you your injunction. You come into my courtroom with unclean hands after being in contempt of the Australian federal court, and you want an injunction? I'm not going to give it to you." So the Japanese appealed to the U.S. federal court, and on December 17th of 2012, after our ships had left to go to the Southern Ocean, the U.S. Federal Ninth Circuit Court gave them their injunction. And then they charged us with 21 counts of contempt after the fact. So we came back and we stood trial. I came back and stood trial in the United States. And at the trial, after a week of presenting evidence, we were acquitted by Judge Shaw. And we thought that was the end of it. But no, it went back to the Ninth Circuit Court, and Judge Alex Kaczynski, without any reason given, without looking at the evidence, overturned Judge Shaw and ruled that we were in contempt, and therefore we have to pay $2.5 million in fines. But you know what? It's worth it. The number of whales that were saved down there in the Southern Ocean by our intervention was worth it. The problem for the Japanese is that they could stop Sea Shepherd in the USA from intervening, but they can't stop Australia, Great Britain, France, and the Netherlands. So our ships registered in the Netherlands, coming out of Australian ports, going into the Southern Ocean to oppose Japanese whaling. What does that have to do with the United States? But yet, the Japanese have a motion before the U.S. federal court to get an injunction against Dutch ships leaving Australian ports to go to the Southern Ocean. Almost as if, probably comes as no surprise, that the U.S. federal court considers the world under their jurisdiction. But they haven't been able to stop it. And this year, the Postal Code Lottery of the Netherlands allocated 9 million euros to Sea Shepherd to build a special vessel that has the speed and the range to overtake those harpoon vessels down there and that will be returning if the Japanese return to the Southern Ocean. Meanwhile, our other ships can now address the killing of the whales in the Northern Hemisphere. So our Navy is becoming stronger. We're getting more and more volunteers. Right now, there's over 100 people on our ships at sea. We have a campaign in the Sea of Cortez right now to protect the endangered vaquita that's on board the Martin Sheen under the captainship of Unalago, France. We have the Jairo Mora Sandoval, which is our vessel now in Cape Verde, working to protect turtles and birds there, along with a side group called Biosphere. We have Steve Irwin in Australia, in addition to the Bob Barker and the Sam Simon. And the Bridget Bardot has left France and will be in Jersey within the week, and will be continuing on a tour of Europe. All of this in preparation for going up to protect whales in the Faroe Islands, Norway, and Iceland. So I think that we've made a difference over the last 3 decades, and we will continue to make a difference, even more so with the more support that we get. Like I said, Sea Shepherd's an interventionist organization. And we're a completely different organization from this point of view, is that when I set it up, it was to represent our clients, not people. So when people criticize our methods or our tactics, I really don't give a damn. We don't do what we do for people. We do what we do for the dolphins, the whales, the sharks, the fish, the turtles. That's who we represent. And as long as we don't injure anybody, and we never have, and as long as we aren't breaking any or committing any felonious crimes, any other criticism is completely irrelevant. You know, a few years ago, I was asked to give a lecture to the FBI Academy in Quantico. They actually paid me to give them a lecture. At that talk, one of the FBI agents said, you know, Sea Shepherd's walking a pretty fine line when it comes to the law. And I looked at him and I said, oh, so who cares how fine it is, as long as you don't cross the line? And he couldn't argue with that. But what he did say is that, well, you know, some of your crew members have gone on to become eco-terrorists. In other words, they liberated some mink from a mink farm, or, you know, saved some chickens somewhere, which in modern day parlance is eco-terrorism. I have to tell everybody I've never been an eco-terrorist because I've never been employed by BP or Monsanto. But the fact is that he said, these guys have gone on to become eco-terrorists. And I said, well, how can I be responsible for what a volunteer does after they leave Sea Shepherd? And he looked at me and says, you trained them, therefore you're responsible. And I had to look back at him and said, oh yeah, well, I've got a couple of names for you. Timothy McVeigh, Lee Harvey Oswald, and Osama bin Laden. You trained them, therefore you're responsible. So, you know, they'll try and use anything. The fact is, Sea Shepherd is a non-violent organization. And we adhere to a policy of non-violence as was defined by Dr. Martin Luther King. And that was you cannot commit an act of violence against a non-sentient object, and we never have. Sea Shepherd's so non-violent that all of our vessels are vegan vessels, and that attests to our value for the sanctity of life. So when people accuse us of being violent, again, I don't really care. It's our actions that speak for themselves, not what people think of us. And then people say, well, how come you fly the pirate flag, the Jolly Roger? And my answer to that is simple. People were calling us pirates so often. I said, okay, if you want to call us pirates, well, we'll be pirates. And we decided to get that flag. And I'd just like to take a moment to tell you what that flag means. The black on that flag represents the extinctions that we're bringing to the world's oceans. The skull represents that humanity is responsible for it. The Shepherd staff recognizes that we are shepherds of the ocean that we're trying to protect. And the trident represents it's an aggressive form of non-violence. And the yin-yang of the dolphin and the whale and the skull means that the harmony that we need is to be found in the ocean, from the intelligence and the behavior of whales and all those creatures that make it possible for us to be. And the other reason is kids really like the flag. So, you know, They like it, we like it. And so we're very proud of them. But when people say, oh, well, it's still a pirate flag, I still have to remind them, pirates get things done. As simple as that. I don't want to live in a world without whales and without dolphins. I mean, that would be pretty much the first step to living in a world with so many other species eradicated. A world without sharks, a world without elephants, a world without wolves. What kind of world is that? It's not a world that is going to sustain itself. And that's what we're all about, is to make sure that we can sustain life on this planet. The environmental conservation movement is not about saving the planet. We're not that arrogant that we think we can save the planet. We're right now in the middle of the Holocene, which is the 6th major extinction event in the planet's history. There's been 5 other before, and the Earth always survives, but it takes 18 to 20 million years to recover from a major extinction event. So the Earth will recover from us, but we certainly won't recover. So really, the conservation environmental movement is about saving humanity. It's about saving civilization and finding a place for us within the context of this world. And that is, we have to return to a biocentric outlook and reject anthropocentrism, which means that this planet and all that's on it was not created for us. We are not the gods that we think we are. We're just a bunch of overly conceited naked apes who are a bunch of divine legends in our own mind. We're a bunch of monkeys out of control. And until we understand that and learn to respect and live in harmony with all of these other species, our future on this planet is going to be very restricted. We have this incredible ability to adapt to diminishment. That might have helped us back 50, 60,000 years ago, but it is going to be the end of us right now. Because as things get worse and worse, what do? We simply adapt. In 1965, if I were to have said to you, you know, in 30, 40 years, you're going to be buying water in a plastic bottle and you're going to be paying 10 times as much for that water as gasoline, you would have looked at me like I'm crazy. Yet not too long ago, I was in a hotel in New York and there was a liter of water beside the bed, and they wanted $12 for it. $12 for a liter of water in a country where gasoline goes for $4 a gallon. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous. But why do we do this? Why do we buy it? Because we've been told that that's what we need to do. This is in a city, New York City has the cleanest drinking water in the country. And yet, nobody drinks that water, they buy it in a bottle. And the same thing is happening with people who eat fish. They've adapted to diminishment. You eat mussels now, where they formerly ate scallops. They eat other fishes before they formerly ate cod. As one species disappears, they just go on to the next species. They treat all of these fishes exactly alike. Where a salmon might take 4 years to become sexually mature and dies, an orange rocky takes 45 years to become sexually mature and lives to be 200 years old of age. They simply can't keep up with our greed and the way we overly exploit everything. So we have to come to terms with that. We have to come to terms with so many things. Plastic pollution in the ocean. Sea Shepherd has a Vortex project, which we're working on right now in partnership with Pharrell Williams, Bionic Yarn, G-Star Jeans. And what that is to find a way to extract plastic from the oceans and recycle it into clothing or anything, but to get it out of the ocean. Right now there's 700 million tons of plastic in the ocean, and it's a far more insidious pollutant than oil, because it's breaking down into tiny little particles which are consumed by birds and fish and killing them. So plastic pollution is a major problem. Not only do we have to extract plastic from the ocean, we have to cease producing plastic bottles and plastic bags and plastic garbage that ends up in our ocean. The solutions are there. The problem is will people adapt to those solutions? Will they accept those solutions? Or do we just want to go on continuously entertaining ourselves with trivialities and ignoring the real problems in the world? The one thing that really I have a lot of optimism about is that more and more young people are becoming involved in ocean conservation, more and more concerned. There are 3 million registered non-government organizations in the world now dealing with environmental issues. This has come a long way over the last 30, 40 years, and I certainly appreciate that. People are dedicating themselves to making this a better world for the future, more and more. When people ask me, well, you know, how can you ask people to risk their lives to protect a whale? That always strikes me as a very strange question. We don't have any hesitation about asking young people to risk their lives, give their lives in wars over real estate or resources or religion. That seems normal. How much more noble is it to risk your life to protect a species like the gray whale, any species like the gray whales, or to protect the sharks? In fact, I can't think of anything more noble. You know, to dedicate your life to the protection of the species. In Bermuda, the storm petrel, the kaha, it's only here today because of the actions of one man, a biologist named David Wingate, who dedicated his life to protecting that species. More and more people dedicating themselves, like Jane Goodall to chimpanzees, or Diane Foster to mountain gorillas, to Elda Costa to orangutans. That's what's going to make a difference. We can't depend upon governments and the big organizations to do anything about these problems. They never have, they never will. All change comes from the passion, the courage, and the imagination of individuals like yourselves. And that's what we try to do in Sea Shepherd, is to encourage people to understand that each and every one of us has the ability to make a difference. All we have to do is focus on what we love and protect what we love. And that's why Sea Shepherd is now a movement. It's not me, it's not an organization. One of the things the Japanese have done for us, they did a great favor for us, is by targeting me, they allowed the organization to grow considerably. And now it is an organization that doesn't have one leader. It's an organization that has hundreds of leaders. And that diversity is a key to getting stronger. The diversity of any ecosystem is what makes an ecosystem strong. And therefore, any movement must have diversity in order to grow and to be strong. And the great thing about the conservation environmental movement around the world today is the incredible diversity that is emerging from so many approaches, whether that approach be education, litigation, legislation, direct action. It doesn't matter. It's people coming together and saying, I'm going to do this. And other people say, well, I don't agree with you doing this, but I'm going to do that. Well, that's fine. If you don't agree with somebody, you go do something else. But what we all really have to do is agree to disagree and focus on the primary goal, which is protecting this planet for future generations. And therefore, people really have to follow their imagination and their passion. And that's happening more and more and more. So every year we're seeing the emergence of more and more grassroots organizations and more individuals being involved. It is a dangerous situation, though. Over the last 10 years, as chronicled in the London Times last year, 920 environmentalists have been murdered. And this is something that doesn't get a lot of coverage. We've tried to focus on Jairo Moro Sandoval, who was murdered on the Costa Rica in May 2013, because he stands for all of the conservationists that have been murdered in that country. Every single one of those murders has been unsolved.